ask something?
Yeah.
It's going to be controversial. And I don't know if you've talked about this because a lot of the theology, obviously we see it in all different kinds of churches, all different kinds of places.
Sure.
This seems to be especially prevalent in majority Black churches.
Oh.
There's a lot of prosperity preaching, but a lot of, as you're talking, I'm like, I've heard that a lot. You are divine. You are a queen. You are, you know, a goddess, something special. And I don't know. I don't know if you've ever talked about the roots of that or why that is.
It's interesting you bring that up. That is a controversial question, especially today's political. Know who that is? Yeah. And there's a whole section on this that she talks about with the Black church and the prosperity gospel and all these other theologies that kind of entered into the Black church. I mean, Carlton Pearson is one of them. Carlton Pearson was a Pentecostal Word of Faith preacher, Reverend Ike. And both of them were very off when it came to a lot of their teachings. That's like an origin there in that regard. I haven't looked too much into it, but you're not wrong.
Yeah.
I have friends. I have a friend, in fact, we've talked many times. She's Black and she talks about this a lot on her, she's in ministry as well on her channel. And that's one thing I asked her. I was like, so what's up with this?
You want to know what's up with it, girl? I'll give you the 411. You're unaware. I get it because Black culture it's the minority culture. And so oftentimes you don't have to necessarily engage in it because it's not the majority. So oftentimes Black churches uplift their congregants in this way because there's this thing called the dominant culture. I'm not sure if you're familiar. And so what happens within dominant culture, the white culture, is that they get to choose what's beautiful and they get to depict what is ugly and what's not. And so oftentimes there's this thing called colorism and featureism within our communities that was really from you guys' culture because we don't look like you guys, that blonde hair, blue eyed girls, you know, the aesthetic standard for what is beautiful. And so what's happened is the Black congregants that go to these Black churches that you're painfully, woefully ignorant about, they are subjugated and marginalized and in many ways put down and made to feel less than for historical reasons, right? And we don't even have to necessarily talk about all of the actual socially engineered segregation and oppression that was thrust upon Black communities. We don't even have to necessarily talk about that. Right now, I'm directly referencing why you would hear a Black pastor of sorts call their Black congregants, which were majority women, queens. Well, that's because the larger culture, the dominant culture, i.e. you guys, made us to feel the opposite. And so there are Black girls who literally look at their skin and are disgusted. There are Black girls, it's several videos of this where Black girls dislike their skin color. Dark-skinned Black girls are made to feel and are actively told by other Black people too, to be fair, not just you guys, that they're ugly, that their hair is not good enough, that everything about their literal makeup is bad because it doesn't reflect or isn't reflective of the dominant culture, you guys.
I thought, like, what if it just wasn't here? It'd just be easier. But like, the only thing that got me through that was like my mom telling me and my friends, especially Kamaya, just like being there and having someone to talk to. It just made me think like I can't leave them because it keeps me like coming to school every day and like just like the smile on my face sometimes. Because this shouldn't happen to anyone. We shouldn't have to hate ourselves because of the color of our skin. And the fact that I had to talk one of my best friends out of not wanting to be like that because the color of her skin.
So, in the one place that's designed for uplifting and empowerment and a place that is supposed to be representative of their God, the one thing that is separate from this horrible, sinful world that has sold and perpetuated these horrible, sinful messages onto them about how they show up in the world, their literal phenotype, the one place that can speak definitively about their phenotype and the confidence that they should exude in this world that has been historically wicked to them, the church is the place that can speak explicitly to that and to uplift their self-esteem when nowhere else gives them the opportunity to do so and to feel confident. That's why the church, the place that's representative of God, has to remind Black people, particularly Black women, because that's who's predominantly there, that you are a queen. And I know that the world tells you you're ugly because you got 4C hair and that your skin is, and because your skin is dark, but you're beautiful, queen. Stand up, rise up. You're more than this horribleness, this disgustingness, this poverty that the world has relegated you to. Rise up, Pooh. You may not understand it because your theology has never had to affirm your beauty because the culture was doing that already. But don't sneak into what we're doing and critique it when you don't understand the implications behind it. Does that make sense now? So I wanted to come on here really quick. Welcome to my channel. My name is Raven, thought leader, therapist, and theologian. I have an MDiv and I can read Greek, ancient Greek, in the New Testament, the biblical language.
Can your pastor read, not the middle column, can your pastor read the right column? The column in Greek, the one that was given to us. Can he read that column?
I can. And I start with that because if you watch the video that I'm responding to today, well, one of the two videos that I'm responding to today, you'd know that one of the critiques was that a lot of Black Christians can't read the Greek or they don't know the original language and how necessarily to parse it adequately so that you can translate the Bible and adequately understand scripture. And so with that, I'd just like to start the video off in saying that, and then also start the video off with an acknowledgement of who I am and what my acumen is and why I have the credentials and the passion and vigor and acumen deep enough to be able to respond to these videos. So again, let's just hop right in, because if you clicked on the video and you know what we're here to talk about. So the reason why those two women were completely out of pocket and out of their historical depth is because their video is void of the historical fact to the degree that the Black church is disproportionately inclined to prosperity gospel theology. It's solely because of historical reasons and the economic disenfranchisement that our community has seen. And if you want to go more in depth around what all that looks like, I did a video, I'll post it right here, that talks a great deal about the economic disenfranchisement that Black people have gone through in this country and have been subjected to with poverty. And so as a result of that, you could understand why a certain subset of people would more so gravitate toward an economic message or an economic leaning in a church that offered them a message that told them that no, your life won't solely be relegated to poverty and strife and pain and struggle, but rather here is a gospel message that empowers you, that assures you that there'll be blessings and riches after this that far exceed the troubles of this world that you've been socially engineered into. So let's pause there. The reason why it was so uncomfortable for Black people, particularly, to hear this message from white women, and then for a Black man to champion this message with such an inflammatory title. He did it obviously to click views. I think the original was like, what did these white women say wrong about Black church, or something to that effect. He used racialized language, black and white, and then essentially trying to make the case that what they said about the Black church wasn't wrong. No, it's not that it was necessarily wrong, but it was void of historical context. Because of Black people's disenfranchisement, economic disenfranchisement in this country, and then white people having literally, historically, and generationally benefiting from white legacy wealth as a result of Black economic disenfranchisement, yeah, it's extremely uncomfortable to hear two white girls espouse thought about, yeah, maybe a social ill within the Black church, or a social thing that we're still trying to tweak right, and we're still trying to get right. Theology, and accurate, sound doctrinal theology, we're trying to still get that right because we're still trying to navigate the woes and the ugliness of the historical disenfranchisement that we were thrust into. Fine, you want to speak on that, sweetie? That's fine. But make sure you do it with the full context, with the full historical understanding. So that's why there was such vitriol in the Black community, specifically the Black church community, because as people of faith, as people who are representative of a Jesus who was a radical in and of himself, and who came for the poor and disheartened and disenfranchised, as Black Christians, so much of our social and political ethic is born from our faith systems. Our faith stirs us in these ways because we recognize the social injustices that have been done to us historically, and so we try to right them with biblical precepts and biblical insights that help gird us up when the world has been so historically evil to us. So even this idea that we can't marry the two concepts, because that's what Smart Christian Channel tried to espouse, is that we can't marry the two concepts of social justice efforts and also our theology, as if that's heretical in some way. How so? Tell table flipping over Jesus that was heretical. Tell the Jesus that scorned the Pharisees in their face for their bigotry. Tell him that it's heretical for us to marry social justice concepts with our faith, with our gospel tradition. No, I think the gospel tradition is the absolute right faith tradition to gather our social justice concepts and passion from. The gospel is the framework for us to protest. The gospel is the framework for us to advocate and uplift disenfranchised communities, and particularly ourselves. Does it go over the gospel message? Absolutely not. But does the gospel message undergird this very message, ethic, and passion? Absolutely, yes. Another thing that stood out to me in their argument and its inaccuracy is that it completely negated the fact that many Black people weren't even allowed to join into theological seminaries until like the 1950s, I believe. As a matter of fact, the current seminary that I attend right now, literally a classmate of mine just recently talked to me about her grandfather was one of the founding president, or he was like around the first CEO or something to that effect, that didn't allow a Black student admission in the 1950s. Right. And so his name was essentially on the building up until very recently because of the recent cultural climate that we've been into. You know, people have been protesting certain names, protesting different people being removed from public praise, right, or public adulation because of their historical choices. And I have my thoughts about that because I think history exists within the context that it exists in. And I do recognize that that's a slippery slope. Nonetheless, his name had to be removed for these reasons. But literally, this was a white girl telling me that her grandfather, somebody who she loved deeply, denied a Black student interest into the seminary that I go to right now. That was in the 50s. That was just very recently. And so while all of the greats that they pedestalize so much within their theological framework, you have your Wesleys and your Luthers and your Calvins, all of those people, those are white men that they regard so highly. And I can go on and on and on, right? They regard them so highly. And every time Black people step into these seminaries, we have to read them on end. Even though Christianity is that was birthed in the Nile of Africa, deep crevices of Africa, we still have to praise and pedestalize the way that it's been formed and shaped and reformulated in westernized theology and westernized ideals. And then anything too remotely close to the spiritualism or the charismatic spiritualism of African tradition, and we have to negate that because it's too loose or it's too liberal. Nevertheless, that's a whole other conversation. I'm making the point that I'm making is it's okay for us to pedestalize that history because that's the accurate history. Many of the Black traditions had to be born from what? Oral history, right? Because European culture and Western culture often praised, especially post the Renaissance era and the Romantic era, they praised rationalism, thought perspective, and tradition that is written down and highly critiqued and criticized and thought through thoroughly through various mechanisms of verification and validation. Juxtaposed to Black culture and many Sun people culture, things were more oral. And so similarly, because once many Africans at the time, enslaved African people got over here and they were taught the Americanized Christianity. It's not that Christianity came from America, let's be clear. However, because they were thrust into an enslaved environment as slaves, they essentially assimilated to the culture that was around them. And so they were inundated in white Christianity at the time. Many things had to be passed down through oral tradition because the white folks wasn't letting us in their church. The white folks wasn't letting us in their schools. And so even our Black theological scholars, to the degree that they were able to be educated, it was in secret oftentimes, or it was very marginal and very few and far in between. Why do you think there are differences and separations in denominations between whites and Blacks? Why don't we go to church together? Martin Luther King said the most segregated hour in America is 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Why do you think that was? We was doing everything else for them. We was feeding their babies, breastfeeding their babies, washing their clothes, washing their houses, doing all the things. Why didn't we go to church together? Because white people ain't want us there. So similarly, the schools were the same. And so you're critiquing Black theology and Black doctrine, and you're judging them without any historical context about how it got so skewed, about how so much of our historical doctrine has been born from oral tradition, which means it's even more vulnerable to inaccuracies. And also the basis on which you're judging it is a Western understanding of the scriptures. Another strange thing to me about this conversation is that why don't we ever talk about the ways the prosperity gospel emerged from American capitalism? Like, what's the guy's name? Oral Roberts, Joel Osteen, and so many others. And Joel Osteen ain't even that old, but I'm just saying it's so many historical figures in the white church, white charismatic movement, to be fair. Nevertheless, critique or make reference to the fact that prosperity gospel was born from American capitalism. The same voices that you hear critique of prosperity preachers, especially the Black ones, are the same ones that'll praise and espouse capitalistic ideals. And I'm not necessarily saying that I'm not a capitalist myself, right? But what I am I go back and forth. Let me not. I'm still on the fence. I do believe that capitalism is historically has been the safest, most effective way to uprise people out of poverty. But that isn't to say that it hasn't been extremely harmful and isn't actively extremely harmful. So I'm still circling the bend around what my views are with regard to economic systems and what works the best. Nevertheless, the same people that critique Black prosperity preaching are the same people that rah go America and are pro-capitalism. And I'm just like, well, wait a second, because this stuff that you hate so much, prosperity, it's literally birthed from American capitalism. What's just happened is it bled over into the culture of the church. And you know why? Because the same people that are in the pews are the same people within this economic system in the country that we live in. Would you look at that? And so, oh my God, you have churches that are hyper fixated on mega churches, that are hyper fixated on people getting wealthy, that are hyper fixated on economic movement. But a lot of times in the white tradition, it's been about acquisition, right? And rising to power. And if you're going to critique prosperity gospel, make a critique of American capitalism. But you ain't going to do that though, because it benefits you. And this is y'all country that y'all adore and love so much. Let go of that right wing ideology and talking points. Oh, I'm not right or left. I'm Jesus. Okay, but make sure you have the backing and the full historical understanding to be able to back that up, because Jesus was poor and he was for the poor and he actively cursed the rich. And to the extent that Black churches did hyperfixate on economic prosperity and economic empowerment, oftentimes it was through the lens of empowerment. Did it go rampantly out of control at times? And has it even? Absolutely. In some predicaments, yeah, it has gone absolutely out of control because American capitalism is out of control, right? And so goes the economy, so goes the culture, so goes the church oftentimes. It shouldn't be like that. And Paul talks explicitly about how much there should be a distinction. However, this is an American church problem. So address it as such. In the same way that Black people were in positions where they had to preach to their congregation a message of empowerment and uplifting, and then it morphed into something that mirrored that of greed and over excess. In the same way that Black people felt susceptible to that because of their particular vulnerabilities in our community, is the same way that much of the theology born from white churches historically perpetuated, produced, and often were the arbiters of racism, and American racism in particular. And you know why the white culture and white community were so susceptible and vulnerable to that? Because it was a message that they'd already been taught over and over and over again. American Christianity, white American Christianity, is so inextricably linked to white nationalism in many ways that I know a lot of them don't even want to. I have so many great white Christian friends that I know would be disgusted by that, the idea of racism and nationalism and all that. And also their theology is inextricably linked to it because of the history of their church, right? Because of the history of their doctrine. But somehow we're able to understand that nuance. And you know what y'all's vestiges of slavery and legacies of slavery have done to y'all's churches, white people? It's created hyper-individualism, hyper-Christian nationalism. And I'm not linking those two things automatically as if to say that all white Christians in the white Christian movement is racist or Christian nationalists. But in the same way, Black people deserve that same respect. It's not that we're just so automatically tethered to prosperity gospel, but where you see disproportionality, seek out more information, seek out more nuance, and not from other white people, but from books. I would suggest that too, because I know in seminary, oftentimes those are the only ones that they actually read. But go read books by people that aren't of your race or your socioeconomic class or from your lived experiences. And I promise you'll learn other things. But don't just get on mics saying things because it's just curious to you. It's irresponsible. Final thoughts from me. It's okay to critique prosperity gospel. I do it, right? But not even just prosperity gospel. I think we've turned the gospel message into moralism. And that's annoying to me because then it just makes our gospel relative. And then oftentimes, because white people are the dominant culture, it's relative to white people. Everything else is the other. How we do theology, how we do life, how we gauge one another. It's all the other. And whiteness is the standard. So it's okay to criticize prosperity gospel, but do it with the proper historical context and proper historical awareness. And furthermore, when you have these critiques, make critiques of the ideologies and not the people group. A lot of people fall victim to prosperity gospel. A lot of doctrine is flawed in this country because of American capitalism and American culture has seeped too far into the churches in many ways. and corrupted the potency of our theology and of our doctrine. And we can talk about that, but not in the context of people groups. And if you are going to bring up the people group, know their history. Okay, that was all I have. I hope that was nuanced enough. I hope that I didn't go too hard. I love all people with Jesus love. This isn't hate or vitriolic at all. This is all in love. And this is to encourage more in-depth, nuanced, thorough conversations, and not just picking up mics for the sake of picking up mics, right? And stoking conversation or being inflammatory for no reason. I think that's silly. And I think and it's cool. I get it. Get your bag, get your money. But I think as body of believers, we can and should do better. And we have the framework to be able to do better. So we should. All right, guys, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me your thoughts about this. I have another video coming very soon, and I know everybody's been like on my butt about it. The part 2 for the Black church woman's relationship with the Black church. Part 2 is coming very, very, very soon. I'm hoping to have it out by the end of the month. It's a lot of editing. Y'all know I've been talking to y'all about that so much. It's so much editing that goes into these videos, but I like to make sure that they are thorough and good because I want you guys to enjoy them. So be looking out for that, but you need to subscribe if you're going to be looking out for it, because the algorithm, maybe it'll bring you back here, maybe it won't, child. I don't know. So you should just subscribe. And then, yeah, let's keep going and growing and talking and loving God and encouraging our brothers and sisters to love God. Okay. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.